Millionaire single dad witnesses stranger holding his lost child. What she whispered left him froze. "Ivy?" Lucas's voice cracked like thunder through the bustling crowd of the Autumn Harvest Festival. Families laughed. Leaves crunched under boots. Music drifted from the main stage. But for Lucas, the world had narrowed to one terrifying thought. His daughter was gone. "Ivy?" He spun, eyes scanning every inch of movement, searching for the little white dress and the bunny plush clutched in tiny hands. She had been right there, just 2 seconds ago. He had bent down to tie his shoe, glanced up, and she was gone. "Ivy?" Panic turned his stomach to stone. He shoved past people, muttering apologies, checking under benches, near booths, beside haystacks. His heart pounded like a war drum, dread growing with each step. It was the first time he had taken her out since Emma died. Just a simple outing, a walk, through the festival. He thought the color, the laughter, the air might break the silence that had swallowed his daughter. Ivy hadn't spoken in months. Since the funeral, she hadn't made a sound. Not a single word. She didn't cry, didn't smile. She just held that bunny and looked at the world like she no longer trusted it. He had thought today might be a step forward. Now it felt like the ground had opened beneath him. "Ivy!" His voice cracked again, louder this time. People were starting to look. No one had seen her. No one had noticed. Lucas turned toward the orchard section of the fairgrounds, breath catching. A stillness there drew his eyes. Under the large maple tree, in a quiet pocket of the park, sat a young woman on a blanket. Cradled in her lap was Ivy. Lucas froze. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't curled up in fear. She was still, calm, resting her head against the shoulder of a woman Lucas had never seen before. And the woman was singing. Lucas took a step forward, then another, his eyes wide. The melody, soft, familiar. His breath caught in his chest. No, it couldn't be. The song, the lullaby, that lullaby. It was Emma's. The one she made up herself. The one she sang to Ivy every night. Lucas had never recorded it, never written it down. It had been their private ritual. Just Emma, Ivy, and that melody. No one else knew it. No one. But this woman sang it with such aching precision, words and cadence and emotion wrapped in a whisper-soft voice that was slightly rough around the edges, like a forgotten record playing a beloved tune. Lucas felt like his lungs had collapsed. The woman had long blonde hair tied in a braid. She wore a pale cardigan and jeans, nothing remarkable, but something about her was peaceful, as if the chaos of the world paused for her. And Ivy, his Ivy, was letting her hold her. That alone was shocking. Since Emma's death, Ivy recoiled from touch, especially from strangers. Lucas had seen her scream when neighbors tried to say hello. He'd watched her shake her head violently when therapists tried to sit too close. But now, she was curled into this stranger's lap, holding her bunny and gently pressing her face to the woman's chest. Lucas stepped closer. The woman opened her eyes and looked up at him. Their eyes met, his sharp with fear and confusion, hers calm, gentle, unafraid. She gave the smallest nod. Lucas knelt slowly beside them. "I'm her father," he said, voice barely steady. She gave another small nod and looked down at Ivy. She stopped singing, gently rubbing the little girl's back. "She was lost," the woman said softly, her voice hoarse, almost like she hadn't used it in a while. "Scared. I just sat down and she came to me." Lucas glanced at Ivy. Her little hand was still curled into the woman's sweater. He looked back at the stranger. "How do you know that song?" he asked, more demand than question. The woman paused. Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. Lucas leaned closer. "That lullaby, how do you know it?" She lowered her gaze. I just I just knew it might help," she whispered. Ivy stirred slightly, looking up at the woman. Then, as if feeling Lucas's presence, she turned to look at him. Her eyes were clear, calmer than he had seen in months. And then, without a sound, she reached out and took his hand, while still resting in the woman's arms. Lucas looked down at his daughter, then at the woman who had somehow, impossibly, sung the only song that belonged to Emma. His world shifted, silently. He didn't understand what had just happened, but he knew something had changed. Forever. Lucas sat stiffly on the park bench, Ivy curled quietly in his arms. The stranger sat a few feet away, hands folded, eyes downcast. She had said her name was Hannah. Hannah Wells. Lucas studied her carefully. Long blonde braid, soft sweater sleeves pulled over her hands, voice scratchy and uncertain, like someone trying to remember how to speak. There was nothing threatening about her, nothing calculated, but there was something unexplainable. He held Ivy a little tighter. "I just want to understand," he said finally. "That song. My wife wrote it. She only ever sang it to Ivy. She never shared it with anyone. How did you know it?" Hannah looked up slowly. Her green eyes met his, and in them Lucas saw something raw. Not guilt, not fear, regret. But she did not answer. Lucas's jaw tightened. "That's not something you just guess. It is not a popular lullaby. She made it up. For Ivy." Hannah opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers gripped the edge of the bench. For a long moment she seemed to battle something inside herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I did not mean to upset you, or her. I heard her crying, and I didn't know what else to do." Lucas's voice was softer now. "But the song, you knew it perfectly." Another long silence. Hannah stared down at her hands. "I heard it once," she said finally. "A long time ago." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "Where?" Again she hesitated. And this time Lucas noticed something deeper. She was not hiding something to deceive him. She was protecting something. Or someone. Her voice, when it returned, was quiet, unsteady. "There was a video," she said. "Years ago, online. It was short, just a mother singing to her baby. I didn't know who she was. I only saw it once." Lucas's breath caught. He remembered now. Emma had let a friend record a short clip just once. It had been shared anonymously on a parenting blog, then forgotten. He had not thought about it in years. He had not even known it was still out there. But Hannah had seen it, and somehow she had remembered. She looked up. Her voice grew even softer. "I lost my voice in an accident. I was 21. A drunk driver ran a red light, hit me hard. I was in the hospital for weeks. My vocal cords were damaged. I couldn't speak for 5 years." Lucas stared at her, stunned. "I was trying to learn again," she continued. "Sound, rhythm, emotion. That video, your wife's voice. It was the first one I could follow. The lullaby, it helped me find my way back to speaking. I didn't know who she was, I just never forgot the sound." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she turned away. Lucas was quiet. His instincts, always sharp in the boardroom, told him this woman was not lying. She had no reason to lie. No motive, no agenda. Only memory. Only music. Only grief. He looked down at Ivy, who was still holding her bunny loosely, eyes half-lidded with sleep. Then something happened. Ivy's little fingers slipped from his shirt and reached out, not to Lucas, but to Hannah. She touched the edge of the woman's sleeve. Hannah blinked. Ivy shifted slightly and, very slowly, leaned her tiny hand into Hannah's palm. A second passed. Then Ivy looked up and smiled. It was small, tentative, but it was real. Lucas's breath caught. It was the first time, since Emma died, since the funeral, since the silence, the first smile. He looked back at Hannah, who who looked just as stunned. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, as if afraid they would shatter the fragile moment. Lucas did not know what this meant, but he knew it meant something. Something had begun, quietly, unexpectedly, and perhaps, in this strange, broken way, the healing had started. The next time Hannah saw Ivy, the little girl walked straight to her and held up her bunny without a word. Lucas, watching from a few feet away, was still not entirely sure how to define what was happening. He only knew that Ivy, who used to flinch at touch, now rested her head on Hannah's shoulder without hesitation. So he invited Hannah back. Once, then again. By the end of the week she had visited 4 times. Each time, Ivy sat a little closer, played a little more, drew with brighter colors. She still did not speak, but her silence no longer felt so heavy. She began to hum, soft, low melodies under her breath, especially when Hannah was near. Lucas had never seen Ivy hold a crayon since Emma's funeral. Now she handed Hannah drawings, blurry, wobbly shapes of 3 figures standing in a garden. Always the same 3, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with yellow hair. Hannah never pointed it out. She never made a fuss. She only smiled and quietly asked Ivy to tell her more through pictures. Lucas noticed Hannah didn't try too hard. She never forced Ivy to respond. Instead, she communicated with calm gestures and soft-spoken words, using picture books, cards with facial expressions, or simply the rhythm of her voice. There was something about the way she sat beside Ivy, patient, present, still, that reminded Lucas of Emma in her quietest moments. One afternoon, Ivy had a nightmare during nap time. Lucas was in the hallway when he heard her muffled sobs. He rushed in, but Hannah was already there, kneeling beside the couch. "It's okay, sweetheart," Hannah whispered gently. "Can I show you something?" She took Ivy's small hand and pressed it lightly against her own chest. "Feel that?" she said. "That's my heartbeat. It means I'm here. You're not alone." Ivy hiccuped through tears, her hand still resting against Hannah's chest. Then, slowly, she mirrored the gesture, placing Hannah's hand over her own heart. Lucas, standing just outside the room, felt something stir deep in him. Not pain, for once. Not helplessness. Hope. After Hannah left that evening, Lucas found Ivy's drawing pad on the table. Flipping through the pages, he stopped at one image. It showed 2 women standing side by side, one with long black hair, the other with yellow. Emma and Hannah, drawn as if they were friends. Lucas stared at the picture for a long time. He was not sure how to feel. It was too soon to even think about another woman stepping into Ivy's emotional space, or his. But the drawing was Ivy's, her voice, her decision. Somehow, she had already let Hannah in. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. He stepped out onto the back patio for air, still holding Ivy's sketchbook. The moon was high, the garden was quiet. Then he heard it. A soft melody, barely a whisper, floating through the night air. He followed the sound, turning the corner of the house. There, sitting on the wooden bench beneath the weeping willow, was Hannah. She was alone. Her eyes were closed, face tilted slightly upward. She was singing the lullaby, not loudly, just for herself. Her voice cracked in places, like she was not used to using it freely, and her hands trembled as they rested in her lap. But the emotion behind it was unmistakable. Lucas didn't interrupt. He just stood there, listening. And he realized something. She was not singing for Ivy. She was singing for herself. For the girl she had been, voiceless for years. For the pain she had carried in silence. For the memory of a song that once guided her back from the dark. Lucas felt something shift in his chest. For so long his grief had lived like a stone, unmoving, solid, cold. But now, watching this woman who had rebuilt her voice from a broken past, he felt it stir. Later, when Hannah finally opened her eyes and noticed him there, she didn't speak. She only offered a soft smile, a little embarrassed. Lucas returned the smile, then looked down at the sketchbook in his hands. He held it out to her. "She drew this today," he said. "She put you next to her mom." Hannah blinked, her breath catching. "She doesn't draw people unless they matter," Lucas added quietly. Hannah took the drawing carefully, eyes glistening. "Thank you," she whispered, then glanced back at the moon. "For letting me stay." Lucas didn't answer, but he sat beside her on the bench. And for a long time, they didn't say a word. Because sometimes, silence was not empty. Sometimes, it was full of everything that could not yet be spoken. The house was quiet when Lucas invited Hannah inside. It had been weeks since the day at the festival, and Hannah's presence had become something of a rhythm in their lives. Not constant, not expected, but welcome. Natural. This time, though, he wanted to show her something. He led her through the hallway toward his study, past the family photos he still could not bring himself to take down. Ivy was asleep upstairs, Bunny tucked under her chin, and the silence of the house felt different now. Not empty, just waiting. He paused at the door before opening it. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Lucas walked to a cabinet and pulled out a small external drive. He plugged it into the laptop and hesitated for a beat before clicking the file. "I haven't watched this in a long time," he said, barely above a whisper. Hannah nodded, sitting quietly on the edge of the sofa. The video loaded. There was Emma, barefoot in the nursery, cradling Ivy in her arms. She swayed gently as she sang, her voice low and honey-soft. Ivy, then just a baby, blinked up at her, wide-eyed. The camera angle was shaky. A friend had filmed it quickly years ago. Emma had laughed about it later. "Just in case I'm not around someday," she had said. Lucas had brushed it off back then. Now he clung to every second. As the lullaby played, Lucas sat beside Hannah, arms crossed tightly, trying to breathe evenly. But something cracked in him when he heard the last line, the line Emma always whispered. His hand in hers, sober stayed. Emma is whispering, "Even when I'm not near, love will find you in the dark." He turned his face slightly away. He didn't want her to see. Not the tears clinging to his lashes. Not the way his jaw trembled. He thought he was hiding it well, but Hannah said nothing. She didn't reach out. She simply let the silence hold space for his pain. When the video ended, she stared at the black screen, blinking slowly. "That was it," she said softly. "That's the video." Lucas looked at her, confused. "The one I saw when I couldn't speak," she explained. "It was short, just a few seconds, but I watched it every night for months. Not for the music, not even the words. It was the way she held her." Lucas leaned back, his chest tight. "I didn't know it was posted publicly," he murmured. "Emma did it quietly. She said she wanted to leave a part of herself behind, just in case. I thought she was being dramatic." He looked down. She wasn't. Hannah swallowed hard. "I had nothing, Lucas. No voice, no sound. That video, it was the first time I saw love I could feel. It was real. I studied it. I mimicked the sound, the pitch. When I finally spoke again, her voice was the one in my mind." Lucas stared at her. The silence between them grew heavy, not with awkwardness, but with weight, with understanding, with grief that had long searched for a mirror. And then Hannah said it, barely a whisper. "Your wife taught me how to speak, even when I had no voice." Lucas did not speak. He could not. Instead, slowly, he reached across the small space between them and took her hand. He didn't squeeze it. He didn't look at her. He just held it, and she let him. Their hands rested quietly between them, and neither moved. The room, once filled with shadows of the past, now held something new, something soft, something real. Lucas finally looked at her, his eyes still red-rimmed but calm now. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. Hannah smiled faintly. "I like her," she whispered back. Neither of them knew what this was, what to call it, but they knew what it wasn't. It wasn't pity. It wasn't coincidence. It was two people both lost in their own ways, finding something familiar in each other's brokenness. A bridge between the silence they had both lived through, and in that still moment no further words were needed. Because sometimes the loudest truths were spoken without sound at all. As the days turned quietly into weeks, the Grant household softened in invisible ways. It was not marked by grand gestures or sudden revelations, but rather by a gentle loosening of grief's grip, a lightness that began with Ivy. One morning, while coloring on the kitchen floor, Ivy looked up at Hannah and whispered something soft, hesitant, but intentional. "I think if we step outside, it'll peel." Lucas, mid-pour with his coffee, froze. His mug trembled as he slowly turned. Dropping to his knees beside Ivy, he stared at her, the sound echoing like music long lost. "She said your name," he said to Hannah, voice hoarse. It was the first word Ivy had spoken since Emma died. Tears welled in Lucas's eyes before he could stop them, though he quickly turned away. When he looked back, Hannah's eyes mirrored his, full of quiet disbelief and gratitude. No one spoke. No one needed to. That afternoon, Ivy handed him a drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a smiling sun. Above them, in blocky letters, she had written, "Hannah equals happy." The message struck deeper than any poem. That evening they baked cookies together, flour in their hair, chocolate smudged on Ivy's chin, laughter bouncing off the walls. It was imperfect and warm, real. On weekends, they planted a small herb garden near the porch. Ivy loved the dirt under her nails. Hannah whispered to the seedlings like they were secrets. Lucas dug with quiet devotion, making room for things to grow. During one such morning, Hannah scraped her hand on a planter's edge. It was a minor cut, but Ivy froze. Before Hannah could shrug it off, Lucas was beside her, already opening the first aid kit. His fingers were careful as he cleaned the wound and wrapped it with quiet precision. She looked up, startled by the tenderness. He did not speak. That night, Ivy left a folded drawing at Hannah's place at the table. 3 crayon hearts. One was labeled, "Voice Angel." Hannah held it to her chest, closed her eyes. It was more than thanks. It was belonging, but feelings, no matter how gently grown, eventually need a name. One afternoon in the park, as they were packing up their picnic, Hannah knelt to tie her shoe. The knot slipped. Before she could try again, Lucas was already crouched beside her. "Let me," he said, softly. His fingers tied the laces slowly, carefully. When he looked up, their eyes met. It lasted only seconds, but something passed between them, something wordless, undeniable. Hannah opened her mouth. Lucas held still. The words trembled on her lips. Her breath caught. "I think I love," but she stopped. The fear crept in, not of Lucas, not of what she felt, but of losing her voice again, of not being enough, of naming something and watching it vanish. So instead of finishing, she stood quickly, brushing invisible dust from her jeans. "I should go," she whispered. Lucas didn't move. Still kneeling, he simply watched her walk away, the late light turning her silhouette to gold. And in the silence, he wondered if love sometimes lived best between the words, waiting, patiently, to be heard. The first signs were subtle, a croak at the end of a sentence, a stiffness in Hannah's throat that made her pause, swallow, and try again. At first she told herself it was nothing, just fatigue, the tail end of a cold. But deep down, an old fear stirred. Within days, the hoarseness became silence. No sound came when she tried to speak. The words were still there, sharp, full, aching to be released, but her voice, the hard-won, fragile thread she had spent years reclaiming, had once again unraveled. And with it unraveled the delicate confidence she had only just begun to trust. Hannah sat at her piano that evening, staring at the sheet music she had been writing for Ivy's upcoming birthday. It was a soft melody, one born not from grief but from peace, perhaps the first song she had written with joy as its source. But now, with her voice gone, the notes on the page looked like strangers. She reached out, tore the paper down the middle, then again and again, until the pieces scattered across the keys like ash. Her hands trembled, her breath hitched. She didn't cry. She just stopped. Stopped answering messages. Stopped visiting the house. Stopped returning to the garden where Ivy once held her hand and sang the beginnings of her name. She was terrified, not of the silence itself, but of what it might take from her this time. She had once survived 5 years in a wordless world. She wasn't sure she could survive losing it all again, now that something beautiful had finally begun to grow. Lucas noticed the absence like a light going out. At first, he gave her space. He assumed she needed rest. But when a week passed and his texts remained unread, when Ivy sat on the porch every afternoon asking, "Where's Hannah?" in her softest whisper, Lucas knew this was not just a cold. One morning, he found Ivy sitting at the kitchen table, crayon clutched tightly in her small hand. She had drawn a picture, simpler than usual, less colorful. It showed Hannah with her wings, the ones Ivy had drawn so many times before, only this time, one was broken. Lucas didn't ask questions. He just took his coat and left. It had been raining, light and steady, when he reached Hannah's apartment. The building manager remembered him and let him up without question. When he knocked, there was no answer, not at first. Then the door creaked open, just slightly. Hannah stood there, eyes rimmed red, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked smaller than he remembered, fragile, as though the silence had somehow hollowed her out. Lucas said nothing. He didn't ask why she disappeared. He didn't press for explanations. She stepped aside, letting him in with a quiet nod. Inside, the room was dim. The piano lid was closed. Torn sheet music still littered the floor. And on the coffee table, a small notepad rested, open. Hannah sat down slowly, picked up the pen, and wrote in looping, careful script, "I didn't need to speak to fall in love with you." She slid the paper toward him, her hand lingering, just an inch from his. Her eyes didn't meet his, but her shoulders shook once. Barely. Lucas looked at the words, then at her, and then he crossed the space between them in 2 steps, sat beside her without a sound, and wrapped his arms gently around her. She didn't resist. Her body folded into his, like a memory, returning to where it belonged. He didn't try to fix her silence, didn't pretend to be strong for her sake. He only held her, long and steady, letting her know in the one language she hadn't lost that she was not alone. Not now. Not ever again. It had been a full month since the day Hannah lost her voice, again, and then slowly, steadily, reclaimed it. The return wasn't dramatic. It came back like a shy guest, knocking softly at the edge of her breath, testing every word with a hesitance she understood too well. But this time, unlike before, it came back to a place that was waiting. Lucas had kept his distance, respectfully yet not absent. Every few days a gentle message, sometimes a book left at her door, sometimes just a daisy taped to her mailbox. He never asked for her voice, he simply left pieces of himself behind to say, "I still hear you, even if you cannot speak." When she finally texted him back, a simple, "I'd like to see you and Ivy," his response came in under a minute. "Come Saturday. Ivy's favorite place. We'll bring sandwiches. You bring your smile." And so, on a warm afternoon when the sky stretched wide and blue above the quiet hills, Hannah arrived at the edge of the meadow. Lucas was there, already spreading a blanket under a willow tree, Ivy sitting cross-legged with a basket of juice boxes and cookies. When the little girl saw Hannah, she leapt to her feet and ran, arms wide, face bright. But what came next startled them all. Ivy threw her arms around Hannah's waist and, in a clear, careful voice, whispered, "Mom says, thank you for singing to me." Lucas froze. It was the first full sentence Ivy had spoken since the accident. Hannah dropped to her knees, tears springing to her eyes before she could stop them. She held Ivy tightly, her hands trembling. It wasn't just a breakthrough. It was a bridge across every silence they had all carried. Lucas in his grief, Ivy in her trauma, Hannah in her fear. Later, when the sun began to dip lower and the shadows stretched long across the grass, Lucas reached into the basket and pulled out a small velvet box. He handed it to Ivy. The little girl opened it with careful fingers and let out a soft, delighted sound. Inside were 2 simple leather bracelets, each engraved with the same words. "You found her when I was lost, and you found me too." Lucas looked at Hannah, his voice barely more than a murmur. "She wanted to be the one to give it to you." Ivy nodded seriously, then reached up and slipped one of the bracelets onto Hannah's wrist. It was small, but the gesture echoed something ancient, something like a blessing, or perhaps a passing of light from one heart to another. Then, without needing instruction, Ivy placed the second bracelet on her own wrist and smiled. Hannah looked at Lucas, her eyes shining with something that felt very close to love, but deeper, steadier. Unknowing, Lucas, saying nothing, stepped forward. He took Hannah's hand, turned it gently in his own, and fastened the bracelet more securely. Then, without letting go, he brought her hand to his chest, laid it flat over his heart, and held it there. No one spoke. No one needed to, because in that single quiet moment, without rings, without vows, without a single word exchanged, their story wrote its next chapter, and it was enough. 1 year later, the building on the corner of Elm and 13th no longer looked abandoned. Its windows glowed warmly in the evening light, and from behind the glass, soft melodies drifted into the air, songs not polished for performance, but offered for healing. The sign above the door read, "The Voice Within." Inside, children sat in small groups, some humming, some tapping rhythms on drums, others holding on to handmade instruments like they were lifelines. On the far wall hung a mural of open hands and musical notes growing like wildflowers from their palms. Lucas and Hannah stood side by side, watching as Ivy gently guided a new student through a breathing exercise. She was calm, patient, mirroring the care that had once been given to her. Her hair, now longer, was tied in a loose braid like Hannah's. Her smile came quickly and stayed longer. She was thriving. She was singing, and she was not afraid anymore. The center had grown slowly, built not from capital or reputation, but from word of mouth and the quiet power of stories that spread between parents of children who had once gone silent. It was not therapy in the clinical sense. It was sanctuary, a space where no one had to explain why their voice trembled, or why, sometimes, it did not come at all. At the front of the room, a small platform had been set up for the opening celebration. Families gathered on soft cushions, the walls strung with lights that blinked like stars. Hannah stepped forward, microphone in hand, though she barely needed it. Her voice had returned months ago, steady and sure, but tonight it was not just her voice the room was waiting for. "It's like to invite someone very special," she said softly. "The girl who taught me that even silence has its own music." Ivy bounded up beside her, holding Hannah's hand. The room quieted. Then, slowly, Ivy began to sing. It was not perfect. It was better. Because the song was Emma's lullaby, the same one that once lived only in memory, and one anonymous video. But now, Ivy sang it with Hannah beside her, their two voices meeting in the middle of every note. A mother and a daughter, a teacher and a student, a past and a future. When the song ended, no one clapped. Not right away. They were too busy holding their breath, swallowing their hearts. It wasn't until Ivy giggled and bowed that the room exhaled, laughter and tears flowing together like the harmony that had just filled the space. Afterward, as guests mingled and sunlight slipped through the tall windows, Lucas pulled Hannah aside into a quiet corner of the center they had built together. "Thank you," he said, voice low, "for everything." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she handed him a copy of the book she had just published. Its cover was simple, white with gold-embossed letters, "The Voice That Found Me." Inside, the dedication read, "To Ivy, to Emma, and to the man who listened, even when I couldn't speak." Lucas ran a thumb along the spine, then looked at Hannah, not with surprise, not even pride, but with something deeper. Understanding. That evening, the three of them sat beneath a tree in the garden behind the center, watching as paper lanterns floated into the twilight. Alvy curled up between them, her head resting against Hannah's arm. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, she said, "Now I have two voices, Mommy's lullaby and Hannah's heart." Neither Lucas nor Hannah replied.